Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here, and today I'm reviewing episode 10, The Black Queen of House of the Dragon, which is a show I love. Okay, so let's get to it. So I've seen a lot of criticism of people saying they're annoyed that this is a misunderstanding. So, they're saying, oh, what is this, like a game of misunderstanding? The characters aren't mean enough, they're not like... I feel like they want two-dimensional characters, and this is why I'm arguing this perspective, and feel free to disagree and let me know about that. Is the Game of Thrones series, in terms of the show and the books, also not based on elaborate misunderstandings? Like, Robert's Rebellion is based on a misunderstanding. I mean, for example, Jaime Lannister. So, if we were if that story was being told the same way that House of the Dragon is, or Fire and Blood is the book, from, like, unreliable sources, how do you think they'd write about Jaime Lannister? So I feel like they'd say, he is a kinslayer, he's evil, etc, etc. I mean, that's what a lot of the other characters think about him. Although I guess it depends who was writing the histories. Like, maybe if Cersei was writing it, it'd be different. But, it very much depends on that. So imagine, that's why I don't quite get it, people saying that they don't like the way the show's doing things, especially the Aemon thing. This is not spoiler free, by the way. Like, I'm going to put that on the start of this video, but just know that I'm going to be getting into all of it. But I wonder if it had been told in the same way. You've got Jaime Lannister set up as this, he's Tywin's eldest boy. He's ambitious. He's killed the king. Like, he's done the worst thing. He's a kingslayer. I wonder if people would then be disappointed if it was in this format, when they showed that actually he was incredibly young, it was the Mad King, and he was, about to hurt a load of people. Jaime had sinned the way he hurt his wife, and the way that he was going to burn a load of the normal people in King's Landing, and so he took that decision, not out of evil and ambition, but because he felt it was the right thing to do, and he was really young at the time. And from that time onwards, he's had to battle with being called a Kingslayer, and everyone believing that. I just wonder if people would, if they did that kind of thing with this show, would people be saying, oh, you've ruined Jaime? Jaime is supposed to be evil and ambitious, like he killed the king. And again, I feel like I say this all the time, but Fire and Blood is literally written like a historical text, where the book itself says that it's fourth hand, or like nobody writing it was there. It's just recycled history with bias, and it deliberately gives you like 4 or 5 different interpretations of every possible event, so you can choose it for yourself. So when people are saying this isn't the same as in the book, sometimes they're correct, like there's some things that have been changed, but a lot of the time when people are saying that, they just mean, oh, they didn't choose my interpretation of the book. They got it wrong. They didn't get it wrong. They chose a different interpretation. And not to harp on about it, but the original Game of Thrones season, it is completely based on misunderstandings. That's why. That's why in the books you have point of view characters, because you've got all these characters on different sides who think, oh, they're the bad ones. Oh, that's why so-and-so's done this. I mean, think about like from the show, Tyrion and Sansa. The misunderstandings that go on there, like Sansa's thinking, oh, he's a Lannister, he's evil, he's one of them, and then realising, actually, no, he's actually being pretty decent to me, like, maybe they're just calling him a monster because he's a dwarf, maybe, maybe it's more to do with that. Jon and the wildlings, so Jon thinks, oh, the wildlings are probably bad people, that's what I've been told, then he goes out and meets them, and he's like, actually, they're actually not, like... They've kind of been excluded from the rest of society, and that's not fair. Stannis and Shireen, I mean, that's quite literally a misunderstanding. Melisandre's whole thing is a misunderstanding. I mean, that's humanity. And that's how wars are. I just feel like looking back at history, like, that's accurate, and I don't really know what people want. And I think they're saying, oh, it's bad writing, it's not three-dimensional enough. When really I think they should be more honest. Like, there's no problem with saying you don't like it. But be honest, at least, and don't try and pretend there's, like, a concrete text that's being, like, terribly slaughtered. Because that's not true. It's just that the interpretation you got, and which you have a right to fight for, is not what's on the screen. They are not getting it wrong. If you think they're getting it wrong with some of these things, some of them they are. There's some events that literally aren't spoken about and would have been, like when Meleys, like, burst through from the dragon pit, and they've admitted they added that in. But for a lot of the events that people are making these comments on, it makes sense in the context of the book, and all it shows is that people haven't read the source text and aren't taking in what the source text is trying to tell you, really. I don't know how else to say that. I know it sounds patronising, but that's literally the point of the book. Okay, so this episode is really Emma D'Arcy's episode. Like, they are incredible. I wasn't sure when we first got the new Rhaenyra, and it wasn't because of the way Emma was playing her, but just because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we all kind of grew to love the young actors, and I almost think Rhaenyra's first episode, played by Emma, wasn't necessarily like, does anyone feel like that? It was a little bit rushed. It was that episode with Harwin and we lost, you know, all that stuff happened so quickly. And I feel like we didn't really get enough Rhaenyra, as much as I wanted. But I mean, I think this episode really shows that, oh my goodness, they are going to carry this show. Emma D'Arcy and Olivia Cook are carrying it. Also, the actor who plays Aemond, I think it's Ewan Mitchell? I'm sorry if I got that wrong. What charisma that man has. I'm sorry. Damon, move over. That man. But this is Rhaenyra's episode. So it starts off with Rhaenyra talking to Luke, which is extremely sad. I love the parallels that they've done with Luke and Rhaenyra and Alicent and Aemond. I feel like they've really tried to mirror that. You've got this mother and her son, the more sensitive second son. And I think it's Screen Crush who spoke about how this season is kind of shaped by second sons, and not even just necessarily sons, like the idea of being second best, like the second daughter with Rhaena and Baela. I think I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but I really like that kind of comparison, because what they seem to be doing with Jace, it looks like, is we've got Jace under the sort of influence of Daemon more, because Daemon's like the stepfather. He's becoming a little bit more tough. Like, we see in this episode that he's quite, I wouldn't say he's not bullying Luke, but when they're fighting, you know, he's taking it very seriously and Luke is a lot softer. And, you know, obviously you can understand because of the time they're living in, you know, Jace is just trying to get him ready and say, look, don't be so sweet and kind because, you know, you will get killed. You know, that's the reality of what they're living in. And I think it's a tragedy. Like, you know, I am into social justice stuff, and that's why a lot of people hate these reviews, but some people like them. This show is entirely about patriarchy and toxic masculinity, but not in a way that villainises the men who are victims of it, if that makes sense. Luke and Aemond have been the most perfect examples to me of two sensitive little boys who don't really care about, like, duty and, oh, I mowed this, I mowed that. But the world they've lived in has made them, I don't know, Aemond has, I was going to say sink or swim, that seems inappropriate with what happens to Luke over the water. But, you know, Aemond has kind of become part of it by the end. You know, that soft, bully little boy has gone completely the other way and become a bully to exist. And he's kind of created a persona for himself that I don't even think, I think we're shown isn't really him. You know, he's putting that on because he knows that weakness means you get bullied. Weakness means people don't care about you or respect you, so he's had to put that on. Luke does the other thing. Luke, bless his heart, is kind of like young Aemond, but he goes the other way because he retains that. I loved the bit where he's talking to his mum and he's saying that, you know, I get seasick, like, I shouldn't have had Driftmark, it should have been Vaemond. That boy has a sense of justice, he doesn't really feel like he's owed anything, which again, I'm going to say that does mirror Aemond slightly, because Aemond hasn't been brought up to think that he deserves anything because he's the second son, but really it's worse because in the Green situation, Rhaenyra has taken up the position of first son, Aegon has become second son, and it's left Aemond even lower than that, like even lower than Helena, like he has no place. It's totally messed that system up. But you know, Aemond's that kind of guy that thinks, right, okay, nothing's going to get given to you, I'm going to work really hard, I'm going to get it. And there's flashes of that in Luke, where Luke's thinking, look, I don't feel like I'm owed anything here. I just want to be nice and normal and happy. And in an earlier episode, you know, the funeral episode, he was saying that he doesn't really want it. Like, everyone's going to be dead. Like, why would he even want to be part of that succession? So Luke, it's really, really heartbreaking. And I think it's really emphasising how bad the system is. Like, I don't think it's just me being like a social justice warrior type that thinks that this is showing us like why this is such a bad system. Like, the monarchy, birthright system, conquering, all that kind of stuff is bad. Because in order for Luke to survive it, he has to become part of it and he has to lose that part of himself. You know, he has to become that. And it's like, what's the point? I probably didn't word that very well, but it's like, nobody can be happy in that system. It's just misery from start to finish. You know what, I am going to get into the second sons thing here. Why not? There's no better time than this. So the idea of second sons in this season, and in this whole genre, is that all of these second sons, in a patriarchal system where being a man means being dominant and assertive and being in charge and showing that, you've got a system where the second sons are kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't, because masculinity requires that they be like tough and assertive and get respect, but also they're second. They have to kind of they have to look up to the other brother, and it's like, it's inherently at odds with those patriarchal, like, medievally ideas of masculinity. Like, it's a real mess, because you've got Damon and Viserys. Damon acts out terribly. He's got a lot of rage. He will not submit to any authority. He's always struggled with that. And I've often thought that if we were to go back to their childhood, we would meet a much more sympathetic Damon. He's kind of become this loose cannon, this dangerous guy that kind of lashes out and, you know, has to show his power in other ways, and almost sulking in some ways to make a point to his brother, because no matter what he does, he can't be more powerful than him. You've got Otto, who's a second son, so he's grasping to get higher and higher. You've got Larys, who literally kills his own brother and dad so he can become in charge. Vaemond dies as the second son because he believes he's owed something after his brother dies. Like, why is he being passed over? He's earned all this. He's able to do more than Luke. Luke's just a kid. Why am I being passed over? Like, that kind of story of the second son being passed over is so prevalent. And it also, like, it gets deeper when you add someone like Rhaenyra, because it's like added to those people's annoyance, which is kind of valid. Like, they're then like, but wait, the sexism comes in, because it's like, wait, the woman comes before the second son? I guess what you've got is like a kind of wounded masculinity, which isn't necessarily their fault. It's like a sort of wound. It's like, I've done everything you wanted me to do. Like, I am the man, I am assertive. You've taught me that's how to be a man. And now you're saying a woman's ahead of me. I think what we see in this episode is we see Daemon trying to kind of, I say groom, not in the sense that he groomed Rhaenyra, but like he's teaching what he knows. And I'm a Daemon anti, like, you should know this, I do not like Daemon. As a character I do, I love him, I like to watch him, I just love watching him. But I'm a Daemon anti, I don't defend that man, I think he's awful. Him and Kristen are just awful, and so's Otto. But what he's actually doing with Jace is he is trying in his own way to teach what's been taught to him. You know, he's not, when he kind of usurps Rhaenyra, because that is what happens this episode. I think Rhaenyra understands that, wait, I'm not just being usurped from King's Landing and from my enemies, I'm being usurped from within by my own husband. You know, it's that feeling of being a woman and like, what? Like, you're usurping me right here. That's kind of what she deals with this episode. But with the way Daemon is with Jace, you know, it's not, even though I'm anti-Daemon, it's not completely bad faith. It's not, oh, I'm going to usurp Rhaenyra and I'm going to do this and don't listen to your mother in a bad way. It's Daemon teaching Jace, this is how you be strong, this is how you be a man, this is how we show loyalty as men, and this is the best thing to do. So it is undermining Rhaenyra, and even as a Daemon anti, like, that's what Daemon's been taught. That's how Daemon survived. You don't get very far in that world if you, I mean, let's be honest, if you listen to women, you don't get very far in that world. Like, you know, you're called like a mother's boy, like, it makes you a joke. You have to be a strong man in your own right in that universe, and that's what Daemon's trying to teach. And I am completely, like, maybe the timeline's wrong. People who know the timeline might be able to know this better. I am convinced that Jace is Kristen's son. Someone pointed out, there's this amazing tweet, I'll try and put it on the screen. The way that Jace stands is so odd. And I honestly think he's Kristen's son, because I think that he's got the same, like, meticulousness, he's quite obsessive, like, he's perfectionist, you know, he's trying to learn the language really well, he won't let himself, you know, he can't make mistakes. He's already born with the kind of title of bastard hanging over him, like, he's he's always trying to prove his honour, trying to prove himself, to fill in the gaps, you know, he's putting up that wall, I have to be perfect. And I think there's a tragedy in that as well, if he does turn out to be Criston Cole's son. I mean, personality-wise, looks-wise, obviously not as bad as Kristen, but I think there's a tragedy for that, because that's someone that Kristen would actually have got on with very well, because we see that with Aemond, like, he does, people who work hard, like Jace clearly does, Kristen would like. The absolute tragedy of him being against his own son. I like the idea of Rhaenyra deciding, I'm not taking the Moon Tea, it's not up to you what I do, I'm just going to have the child anyway, and pass it off as Laenor's. I like the idea that Harwin might have even known, because Harwin is like the nicest guy in the whole story. I love Harwin. And maybe he knew that. And it would kind of add more depth to the idea that in the training scene, you know, Kristen's bullying these boys. What if it isn't as simple as Harwin sticking up for his sons, but he's aware, because he can be trusted with it, that that boy is Kristen's, and he doesn't want to see a father hurting his son, and he, like, for both of their sake. Wouldn't that be an interesting twist? I just, that, to me, I think that's a thing, and I think that could be very tragic going forward. I think for Kristen to realise that could unravel his whole worldview, honestly. I think that would be really tragic. Now, the sad thing about this episode is Luke tries to tell Rhaenyra. Like, Rhaenyra makes a lot of mistakes this episode, but they're all well-intentioned mistakes, and I think that's very much like her from the book. I think she does make a lot of mistakes. She's quite a pure character, I think. I know it's a weird way to put it, but she does feel like quite a pure character, you know. I think because she was brought up as the realm's delight, she's privileged to a certain way, in a certain way that other characters haven't been able to be. She's been able to be a bit more cheeky. She's ultimately known that whatever goes wrong, her dad will kind of have her back. She's been able to push boundaries. I genuinely think it's a shock to her, this episode, when she finds out that she's been usurped. I genuinely think that because she's been brought up as like the realm's delight, I really think she's just shocked by it and so hurt that how could anyone do this? Like, you swore oaths to me. Like, that's what Dad said. That's what my dad said. She's quite naive, but it's not a bad thing. She's quite privileged. She's not really, you know, she says to Luke about, I had to earn my inheritance. Has she really earned her inheritance? I think she tried, because she tried to make it work with Laenor. But I think that's an interesting difference between her and the Greens, and why the Greens are possibly better at this, because they genuinely came up out of nowhere. You know, they are always plotting ahead. They're always plotting worst case scenarios. Alicent's had every worst case scenario imaginable happen to her. Rhaenyra's not. So I think Rhaenyra really is hurt and feels like, but the masses love me. And I don't think she quite understands that the people don't really care. You know, she's still got that Targaryen sort of supremacy thing going on. But I love her. I think she's a good person. In this universe, she seems like a really nice person. And I root for her so much. And I think that's part of her tragedy. But she's genuinely hurt. She's quite a pure character. And Luke is kind of telling her in this episode, look, Mum, I'm not like you. I don't think I should inherit. Like, I'm not the same as you. And Rhaenyra's mistake that's going to haunt her for the rest of her life is that instead of listening to him and accepting that actually, okay, maybe that's true, she tries to help him, and she tries to say, look, you know, you'll be just like me. I wasn't perfect. You'll be able to do it. Just try it, you know, and I'll back you. And what Luke's really trying to communicate in a tragic way is, I am not cut out for this at all, and I wish you would see that. It's a real tragedy. It's so painful. I think there is a kind of mirror in the way that Alicent doesn't see her children, and I wonder if it's the same with Rhaenyra. And I'm not saying, you know, some people are saying, oh, Rhaenyra's like a bad mother or something. She's not. Like, Rhaenyra is a very affectionate mother. She loves that boy. You can see it so much. But I think she pushed him too far too fast, because she could have done it when she was younger. And I just think it's so sad. It's that little boy trying to live up to it and think, okay, I'll make my mum proud, like I can do this, and then it just goes all terribly wrong, because Rhaenyra has grown up in a world where things are handed to her. I don't mean that to be against her. Like, I like Rhaenyra very much, but she has. Like the Greens have had to scheme this whole time, and they're very good at it, because they're always thinking, what's the worst thing that could happen and how will we deal with that? Rhaenyra kind of expects the best from people, and that's why she's very much let down, I think. You know, she's very shocked by betrayal. She's quite truthful herself, and she's quite good. Like, she is quite honest. I know she's not honest about the whole Kristen Cole thing, but she's not dishonest in a way that makes her villainous, you know? She's just cheeky with it. And I think she's just so shocked. Like, this whole episode, I think, is her realising that, wait, like, being good and being honourable and being kind and being just, and it doesn't make the people support me. Like, all this has happened, and what? Like, I just such a tragedy of an episode for her. Luke is so much like his dad as well, and it's just, I get so upset. When I think about the fact that Harwin is dead, and she ended up with Daemon, like, she could have just been with Harwin, it upsets me. You know, he's quite a lot like Luke, isn't he? You know, there's a lot of that sort of, I don't really feel entitled to things, you know, I just care about people, I want to help, I don't need to be in the spotlight, I don't need to inherit, like, that's so Harwin, like, I'm happy to be a support kind of thing. And quite literally, that, he's going to get eaten alive, quite literally, you know, because he's not prepared, he's not been made into this tough masculine presence like the other boys in the story have been, and that's the tragedy, because boys like that can't exist. They do die in this system. They don't succeed, and that's what's happened to Aemond. So Rhaenys turns up, and she tells Daemon and Rhaenyra that the Greens have taken over, they've crowned Aegon, and Rhaenyra's in shock. Again, it's that purity of thinking, how? Why would they do that? Like, really? Without telling me? You know, it's all a surprise to her. You've got Daemon, who, this man is delusional. I cannot tell you. I don't know why people like Daemon, honestly. So he's trying to say that, oh, they must have killed Viserys. Have you seen Viserys? That poor man has been suffering for so many years with a long illness, and he's quite elderly anyway. What? Like, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense. You've got Rhaenyra, you know, immediately going to Alicent and saying, well, Alicent commanded this. And Rhaenys saying, yes, that, you know, she did. And Rhaenyra's being, like, hurt to her core. I don't think Rhaenyra's quite in the game yet. I don't think she believes that she has to stoop to that. And I think that's a horrible realisation for her going forward. I think she thought it was going to be easier. I think she's, like I said, she's quite a pure character. She thinks this will be quite easy. It's not going to be. Daemon, you know, says, oh, but you're still alive, which is an interesting moment. Because you've got all this... See, I love the nuance of this series. I love the character relationships, because you've got Rhaenys, who I think in this episode, and over time, has started to think... And again, it's a misunderstanding, because in this case, Daemon actually hasn't done anything wrong. I think she's watched them and she's started to think... You know what, maybe it wasn't Rhaenyra that killed Laenor. Maybe it was Daemon to get power. Which obviously isn't what Daemon's done. But I wonder if that's Rhaenys' thought process. She certainly seems to be watching them and thinking about Rhaenyra and thinking, actually, I don't know if you're... I think I might have been wrong about you. Daemon's saying about Alicent, you know, he basically calls her a whore and accuses her of killing Viserys. Like, this is a girl that... I won't get into this like in a big way now, I have before, but she nursed that man. She was coerced and married to him as a child, really. You know, she was still very young. And she cared for him all those years. And it's just so interesting, because I wondered when we started this season if Aemond and Daemon were going to be mirrors of each other. You know, a lot of people have liked that. It's like that Homelander and Soldier Boy thing, isn't it? It's like the original and the copy, and which is better. And I've actually realised that's not what they're doing with Aemond, and it's a misdirect, because the actual mirror, I think, is Kristen and Daemon. Like, I've started to realise that's the mirror. Because they're both these kind of... They're misogynists, both of them. They've both got so much inbuilt anger. They feel they've been passed over in a certain way. And the anger, for some reason, comes out at women. You've got Kristen, who completely hates Rhaenyra beyond all reason, like in a really angry, violent way. You can tell it's really het up. Daemon has somehow placed all this anger and hatred upon Alicent. And they're mirrors of each other. And in that moment, you've also got the addition of Rhaenyra thinking about that. Because while Daemon's thinking, you're a traitor, Rhaenys, you should have just killed them all for doing that. And she rightly says, it's not my war, like, why would I do that? I'm not a kinslayer. You know, he takes her for granted. And, you know, Daemon is so entitled. And then you've got Rhaenyra actually thinking about that. Wait a second. Alicent didn't put her to death. This is more complex, because she could have been killed and yet she's come here to warn us. Why wasn't she immediately killed? It's very complicated. So then we've got Rhaenyra going into labour out of shock, which is really horrible. So she miscarries, unfortunately. It's too early to have the child. And it's a really awful scene. And I don't know. I don't know what I feel about this, because I do think there is too much, you know, drama made of female suffering, of the suffering of women on screen. But I think in this show, it feels very centred. It felt like it was making a point, and maybe I'm wrong, but I really feel like, because I'm really interested in history, and when, for example, a woman from the Tudor period went into labour, she'd be out of action. She would be in confinement. You know, the men wouldn't enter. She'd be fighting her own battle, and I almost wonder if that's part of as well with Queen Elizabeth I, why she didn't marry and have kids, because she'd be out of action. And even today, you know, if you're pregnant, you're out of action for a while, and there's discrimination about that. But in those time periods, how does that work when the actual heir, the new queen, is doing that? What does that mean for her? Like, the pain of it, the struggle of it. This is her body going through a battle. And while this is going on, you've got Daemon and the other men plotting a war and a course without consulting her. And I'm a Daemon anti. However, I've seen a lot of people who kind of romanticize him. I think they fancy Matt Smith, they romanticize him a lot. They're like, oh, you know, she was yelling and in pain and he didn't go to her. I don't think that's the biggest crime, though. I mean, I think, because of the time period, I think thinking into Daemon's perspective, because again, he's not two-dimensional. I don't like him, but he's not two-dimensional. In his mind, in the world he's been part of, I think he genuinely is thinking, right, she's having her battle, And the best way I can show my loyalty is to secure this war, to secure the fortress, like, to get loyalty. I'll do all that stuff. I'm the man, I'm going to do that. It's a patriarchal and sexist way of thinking, but it's not... I don't know, I don't think it's that out of character for him or that odd, you know, in his own way, in his own mind. I think he thinks that's loyalty. When he talks to Jace, he's like, I will show you what it means to be loyal. In his mind, he is thinking, I'm going to do this so she doesn't have to. And it's a mirror of when the Greens were plotting to get Aegon on the throne and they hadn't told Alicent. And Alicent probably could have been on board with it anyway, but they didn't tell her. They went over her head because they thought, you don't need to know that. And it's what they're doing with Rhaenyra. And again, it's that Rhaenyra realises this episode, I think, that Daemon does mean well and he loves her in his own way. And I will say that, even if he abuses her, because I think there's this disconnect with how that particular scene's been perceived. A lot of people are saying, but he loves Rhaenyra, he's loyal to Rhaenyra, you know, this is the sort of thing you'd do if you hate someone. But unfortunately, in real intimate partner violence or domestic violence situations, whether that's romantic or familial or you know, any sort, it's the perpetrator doesn't usually see themselves as a villain, and they do in their mind think they love the person they're abusing sometimes. You know, it's not... that's been worrying me, those responses, saying, but he loves her and he'd do anything for her. And it's okay, like, yes, that's how he justifies it to himself, and he probably does feel that. It's rare that you'll get, you know, in a domestic violence situation, a perpetrator who's actually, especially at the start, who's going to sit there and be like, oh no, I despise them and I don't want them. Like, of course not. It's a control and power thing because you want to kind of possess them. It's a love that's kind of twisted. Love. It's not a healthy love, but that's kind of what it is. But this episode, Rhaenyra seems to realise that Daemon isn't giving what she needs. And that's why I think he's the opposite, not the opposite, like the mirror of Kristen, because it's two sorts of misogyny. Daemon has gone over her head. He has taken authority without asking her. He's not listening to what she needs. You know, and this is something I think a lot of women will relate to this, you know, even today. A lot of the time men will think they know best, what's best for you. And in some cases they will. It's not about gender sometimes. Like, you know, if someone knows more about something than you, they will know best regardless of gender in some cases. But when it comes to what you need and your struggle, I think a lot of the time it's kind of taken over your head and it's, this is what I thought you needed, so this is what I did, and why are you angry about the fact that I did it? It reminds me of proposals in public. It's not actually about the person, you know. If it's... Real respect would be asking what the person needs. What does Rhaenyra need? And that's not what Daemon can give her. And I think that's a horrible realisation for Rhaenyra. She thought that with Daemon he's a loose cannon, that she's kind of found someone who's a bit like a libertine, you know, he's a rebel like she is. And I think it kind of sinks in that actually, wait, he's not. He's actually not as progressive as I thought he was. Wait a minute, I'm in a different sort of trap here. And people are saying it's bad writing, you know, Rhaenyra's saying, oh, he's gone to madness, he's plotting his war. I mean, it's not bad. I don't think it is bad writing. I think that with Daemon, again, it's a toxic masculinity thing where I feel like Daemon hasn't ever been allowed to be soft. He's had to be tough. He has so much anger and he lashes out with it because he doesn't know where to put it. He's not allowed to be vulnerable. The men and the boys in this story aren't. You know, they will be killed, really. You know, if you're vulnerable in this story, I mean, you're in for it. That's the horrible system that they're in. Daemon's grief and his concern about Rhaenyra and this whole situation is he can only express it in anger. He can only express it in rage. And it's the same thing that Kristen does. They can only express it in rage because it's the only safe outlet. You know, some people are saying they've perceived it and said, you know, Daemon's grieving and he probably wants to cry. You're right, but don't romanticize it. You're correct. I think he is worried and upset and he's lost his brother, but he can't cry. He's a tough guy in this medieval fictional time period. He can't lose face. So it's coming out in anger, it's coming out in action. It's coming out in the wrong way. Rhaenyra describes it as a sort of madness, he's plotting his war. And we've seen that reflected in Corlys as well, and Rhaenys, and they've got a good relationship, it seems. You know, I think they've got quite a... I feel like they've got the relationship that people imagine that Rhaenyra and Daemon have, but Rhaenyra and Daemon don't have that. Like, Rhaenys and Corlys do have a real equal fiery relationship. I never watch their scenes and think, oh, one of them's in charge of the other one, or one of them's groomed the other one, or, you know, they seem like to me, they seem quite modern, you know? But even in Corlys, you know, you've got that actual scene where Rhaenys says to him, I needed you. And he said, oh, I wouldn't have been any use. I was grieving. I had to go and do this elsewhere. And she's saying, no, listen to me. I understand that. But you're not helping me because you're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. And what Corlys learns over the episode as well, well, not over the episode, and again, this is a bit, I'm going all over the place with this, but okay, let's talk about that Corlys scene. So Corlys is ill and he is anti-Rhaenyra, which makes sense because he thinks that Rhaenyra was part of the death of Laenor, and he's really angry about it. And then Rhaenys says to him, he thinks he's doing what Rhaenys wants by saying, let's come away from the war like you want. And she says, look, I'm sorry, but... And she says, look, it's too late for that. Our grandchildren are involved in this, and if we want them to live, we have to fight for them. And, you know, some people saying, oh, he turned that around too quickly. He just said he wanted to do this, and now he's doing something else. That's not bad writing for me, that moment, because I think what he's actually showing us is that the real thing he's learned is that he wants to listen to Rhaenys more. He's sorry that he didn't, and he wants them to be collaborative, and he's not going to barrel over what she wants now. Because that's what she wants, he has come to terms with it, and he said, okay, we'll do it your way. The weird thing is when he's suddenly all pally with Rhaenyra after in the you know, the council room after it's just too quick, you know. People have pointed out he's smiling at her like she's a daughter of his, and I think that is too soon because he doesn't know that she didn't kill Laenor. You know, that is odd. But the thing where he changes his mind when he's talking to Rhaenys doesn't seem bad. In fact, that's him learning and thinking, right, what does my wife need from me? What does she want? And how will we navigate this together? So we've got Rhaenyra having to tell her boys about Viserys dying, and she's desperately trying to keep control of them, and it feels very similar to Alicent. It's like, I've raised you, I loved you, you're my boys, but you're now in a world where in some ways your gender means you might even outrank me. And I feel like people don't think about that very much, but Jacaerys could, if he wanted, usurp his own mother. Will be people who support her claim and they'll want Jacaerys, not because of her, but they'll think, oh, you know, she's got a son, you know. Aside from the whole illegitimacy thing, you know, that's going to mess up a family dynamic. And I think it's this desperation, it's that image of, I'm having this child, I'm having this miscarriage, I can't do anything, no one's listening to me, please, you're the son that I raised, please don't let Daemon do this, tell him nothing happens without my say-so, I am the heir, I am the queen, you're doing this for me, please tell him that. It's a desperation, it's a pain, it's Rhaenyra, I think, feeling at her very most powerless she's ever felt. I think there's been an illusion of power with Rhaenyra that she's felt all these years, and I think she suddenly realised that it was a lie. She doesn't have the power she thought she had. It's a horrible situation. Now, another thing, I mean, this seems way too simplistic, I'm sorry, but we've got what I would say is mansplaining in this episode. So, we've got Rhaenyra, who is the heir, okay? Rhaenyra has studied the histories. Rhaenyra is queen now. She's being crowned. And you've got Daemon undermining her at every possible turn. And this is, for me, where their relationship's going to fall apart. Their relationship was always dependent on a power imbalance. It was always partly linked to Viserys, like, we're together, Viserys loves us the most, and, you know, we can go against him, but also we defend him. It's like a weird thing. But you've also got a power imbalance where Daemon needs to be needed. You know, Rhaenyra needs him. He grooms Rhaenyra. He's this man who can offer her things and who can teach her things, and he's a teacher. Daemon does not do well with authority. We know that. That's his main character flaw, is that he does not take... He is his own authority. Nobody tells him what to do. So him now being married to the actual queen, that was going to cause difficulty anyway, wasn't it? Really, if you think about his personality type. He struggled to even, you know, respect his own big brother, who he adored, when his brother gave him a command, because he doesn't like being given commands. Rhaenyra is the queen. Rhaenyra now outranks him. And actually, Matt Smith kind of played a variation on this before, but nowhere near as bad as Daemon in The Crown, when Elizabeth II becomes queen, and Philip's suddenly like, wait, like, in our time period, I'm your husband, like, I would be in charge of the household, but you're in charge. It's that situation with Daemon. But Daemon thinks he knows best. You know, Daemon's been to war. And in some ways, you know, he has been to war, so his contributions are valid. It's not that, it's the fact that he's taking over. Rhaenyra has become, like, she's just standing in there with the crown and listening to people, and Daemon keeps, this is what we're going to do, I know this, and he even tries to tell her, like, you know, about the histories, and she has to say in front of people, he's embarrassing her in front of people, he's undermining her. She has to say, yes, thank you, like, I'm very well acquainted with the histories. Like, I do read them myself. I was raised as the heir. And again, I do think that's part of their conflict, because I've always thought their relationship is very much about Viserys. It's not really about Rhaenyra, and that's why I don't really understand people really liking it, because aside from the fact that it is grooming and Daemon is quite an abusive character, it's about Viserys. It was always about Viserys. You know, I think Matt Smith said himself that the character, well, the relationship that means the most to Daemon in all his life is his relationship with Viserys, his brother. That love is unbreakable. That anger is unbreakable. That resentment is unbreakable. I really find that relationship interesting. But now Viserys is gone, and it's a situation where, wait, now they're not, you know, as a couple, and it's a situation where he has to realise that, wait, Viserys loved you more than me, which is normal because that's his daughter. You know, you would love your child. And a normal sibling wouldn't be, like, jealous about that. But Daemon is incredibly jealous. He needs that validation from people. He pretends he doesn't, but he really does need a lot of validation. And the fact that Viserys has chosen Rhaenyra and prefers Rhaenyra is going to sour their whole relationship going forward. It's going to make him so angry and jealous in ways he can't even articulate. My mum just got back, by the way, so if you hear, like, rustling and stuff in the background, there's another human in this house. It should be fine. And I definitely feel like people romanticise Daemon to the extent that, you know, oh, he's going to love the fact that Rhaenyra's queen, he's going to respect her as queen, and, you know, he's going to support her claim. But I think what people didn't really consider is, why is he supporting Rhaenyra? Is it because they're now connected to each other? Because he's wanted to obtain Rhaenyra for a long time. Is it just the power? Because when it's something he wants, he's like all for it. He's like, yes, like team Rhaenyra. And then when she goes against him, he gets really angry. Like, he sulks. He sulks with Viserys. The thing with Daemon, I've said this in another video, but the thing with Daemon's personality is that he shows love to people and kindness to people only when they're doing what he wants for them. Watch what Daemon does to people and how he reacts to people when they don't do what he wants. He has no tolerance for that kind of thing, and the other characters in the story do. Pretty much all the other characters in the story have more tolerance for that than him. He can't tolerate people not doing what he wants. He is a control freak. He has to be in control. He is actually, you know, people saying, oh, he's not, he wouldn't be, like, domestically violent or something, but he's got everything that you would need for that. He's got that need to be in control, that kind of domineering sort of love, the idea that you're possessing someone, you're not really their equal. Have him and Rhaenyra ever really felt like equals? Genuinely. I don't think they have, and I think this episode really shows that. And I think Rhaenyra realises it as well. Now, I also really love what they've done with Rhaenyra in this episode in terms of how she carries herself as queen and the decisions that she makes. So, and I do think this is, in a very stereotypical way, I'll probably word this really wrongly, but it's that idea of women in power and men in power according to traditional gender roles. So, you know, people often think, even today, that, like, men are going to be assertive and they get things done, and, oh, women think about things too much and they're too weak and, you know, they're not hard enough, and so you get a lot of women, you know, people like Margaret Thatcher, for example, trying to be as tough as possible and as unstereotypically feminine as possible to prove they're just as much as the men. But what this show is giving us is Rhaenyra is a different sort of leader. She's using her experience differently, because all the men around her are, there's an insult and they immediately go for war. Daemon immediately, his first action is to lash out. But remember that Rhaenyra, as a woman in that time period, hasn't had that option. So of course that's not the way she's going to immediately react. Rhaenyra is more measured. She thinks more about what she's going to do. Who are my allies? And you know, I think this is to do with her being a woman in that time period, because she has to think carefully. She could never do the impulsive things that Daemon did. She desperately wanted to. She idolised him. You know, he was forgiven after he did awful things, but the world isn't so forgiving to women. So I think people saying, oh, I wanted Rhaenyra to start this war and do this, she's also contending against the sexism in their society. She's going to get judged worse than any man for anything she does anyway, in that time period, and by viewers probably, as we've seen with Alicent as well, unfortunately, even in 2022. So she's taking a more measured approach. So she is saying, look, I don't want to immediately start a war. I care about all the people that would fight for me. If there's a way to do this in a diplomatic way, I want to do that. And to Daemon, that comes across as weakness. And that is... See, I think this... People have said this show is anti-feminist. I don't think it is at all. That's not my interpretation. I think they're showing that clash. You know, people think that's weakness from Rhaenyra. Is that weakness from Rhaenyra, or is that another way to do things? You know, because I know she makes mistakes in this episode, but she also decides not to start a war. And even Rhaenys says, you know, she is holding this kingdom together, Also, she's got responsibilities, so she knows that she's got to try and hold off the long nights. She knows she's got to try and keep people alive and safe. She's got this extra knowledge, you know, and everyone around her just wants a war, and that there is something in that society, and you know what, I will say today as well, but especially in the medieval society, that the idea that men go to war, you know, for honour, and we saw it with Jon Snow as well, who really actually grew away from that, and a lot of the characters do. But when they're young, they think, you know, they're boys or young men with a lot of emotion and empathy, and they want to feel like they're worth something, and they feel worthless, and they just think, right, I'll prove myself by being a hero, I'll prove myself by being violent and killing people and going to war, because that's what makes you a strong man, and you know, that's what you get admired for. But they kind of suffer for it. It's the only outlet. Like, you often see male characters in the Game of Thrones universe using violence as an outlet because they can't cry, you know, they can't just express how they're feeling. It's a really awful situation for them. I like that you've got Rhaenyra, you're saying that she doesn't want to rule over a kingdom of ash and bone, which makes complete sense, of course not, because remember, she loves these people and she thought these people loved her. You know, she was the realm's delight. She feels she has a duty to them. Why would she want them dead? Like, she wouldn't. And too many people are, you know, watching the show and they're like, oh, Rhaenyra should have done this, and oh, they should have, like, you know, she should have burned everyone, and why? Everything. We're in 2022. We should surely be more appreciative of diplomatic efforts rather than, you know, plunging everyone immediately into war on an impulse and there being a load of death and suffering. Like, I just still feel like that today. It's like the dragons as nukes argument, and I feel like this is an argument we're still having, and I get totally had to go out for this all the time because I'm very much anti-nuclear weapons. And I'm kind of anti-war unless it's like a last resort, but I'm very much of the opinion that diplomacy has to try and come first. And some people think that's weak even today, but, you know, the human cost of these things is huge. So Rhaenyra, some people have said, oh, they've made her weaker than in the books. That's not weaker. You know, Alicent saying that reluctance to murder is not weakness. People aren't getting that memo. We're in 2022. I can understand if we were a load of medieval people watching it and having that perspective, but we're in 2022. That's quite admirable, because you've got Daemon who wants an all-out dragon war because he wants glory and, you know, to show strength and power. Why, though? Why? Like, it's just it's a selfish thing to want. It really is. Why would you want some sort of dragon war? Like, just, you know, his outlet has always been, you know, we saw when he was with the Gold Cloaks. It wasn't really about justice, was it? It's like Kristen, he pretends it's about justice, but really it's his outlet for anger. It's his outlet for power and control. And that's just what Kristen's done, but the other way, like in a more conservative way. Now, that scene. Let's talk about that scene. And, okay. People have been so... I think people romanticise Daemon, so the scene where he chokes Rhaenyra is... I mean, obviously it's a horrible scene, it's a horrific scene. But it's really bizarre to me to see people that literally have used every bit of sexism possible against Alicent in this show, and actually, like, seemed happy when bad things happened to her, and have actually been unable to even identify her as a victim of marital or of coercion, and have presented her as a schemer, even when that's not on the screen. They're unable to see her pain, and that's scary considering some of these people are women from we're women from 2022. That's really scary. You know, that there've been jokes going on about that for ages, and all of a sudden now they're taking the moral high ground, or they think they are. They think they're being really slick, but it's really obvious that, oh no, the reason we don't like this is because it's shock domestic violence on screen. Where were you guys when Alicent was being coerced and maritally? Weren't you the guys calling her a homewrecker and blaming her for that? Haven't you been making fun of Alicent all this time, when Alicent's also a victim, like Rhaenyra is, just in a different way? It's just so disingenuous. And I think it's because of Daemon. Like, there's this thing today that we have to deal with, which I'm a leftist, so it's interesting. It's the way that progressive language and leftist politics is now being weaponised by people in a really bad faith, disingenuous way to add legitimacy to an opinion where it isn't justified. Because I think sometimes people feel afraid of just having an opinion. They feel like they have to legitimise it by saying, and that's because this is sexist, or that's because such and such. And it just undermines the actual criticisms about You know, if you're actually coming to this universe, the A Song of Ice and Fire universe and Game of Thrones, and you're angry against the abuse against women in the show, then I hope you've been saying that about Alicent. I hope you've not been villainising Alicent the whole time, that teenager, because otherwise it's really bad. It really, really is bad, and it undermines actual feminist critique of the show. It's just awful. Also, and I've said this before in another video, people are saying, oh, Daemon would never do that. This is a man who killed his first wife violently. It's in him, right? His second wife he married for power. Okay, so, you know, and I'm not saying he was like a bad husband to her, but he wasn't a particularly great husband to her as far as we can see. He is somebody who lashes out when he's angry, we know that. He finds it difficult to handle his emotions. He's violent. He needs to be admired. He can't handle people asserting authority over him. He thinks he's entitled to certain things. All of those aspects have been in his character. And I think especially in the context of that scene where he realises that Viserys has shared something with Rhaenyra that wasn't shared with him, you know, it really comes to a head because it was never about Rhaenyra, it's about Viserys. And he liked you more than me, and now you're going to pay. You know, it's childish. I mean, Daemon is quite childish the way that he thinks. He's really quite infantile. And it's horrible. It's like this control, it's this anger, it's don't tell me what to do, don't you tell me anything. I'm supposed to be teaching you. Yeah, that's why he groomed her, isn't it? You know, I'm older than you. I'm sure he did love her and probably does think he loves her. Because she needed him, you know, she looked up to him. You know, it's almost something he'd won from Viserys, isn't it? It's, I'm going to guide you, I'm going to be your guide. You know, you need my help, your heroic uncle. Now it's turned, he's done exactly what a lot of us thought he would do. He can't handle being told what to do by someone. And again, the people saying about, you know, oh, it was shock domestic violence, this isn't in his character. But it is in his character. I mean, I know that, you know, you might have thought he wouldn't do that to Rhaenyra. You know, people have genuinely said, oh, show me where he's ever done anything bad to Rhaenyra. When Rhaenyra was a teenager, he groomed her, took her to a brothel in front of everybody so that she'd be ruined. You know, he left her there, naked and vulnerable. Her reputation was so ruined. When Viserys found out about it, Daemon didn't even tell his brother that actually she's not to blame. He let her take the fall for that. She was seen as ruined. She was then forced into a marriage to, you know, protect her reputation. That was really bad. And even Viserys, you know, Viserys kicked the guy and banished him for 10 years. It was a bad situation. And I've seen people saying, oh, it's not actually that bad in the world of the story. Why then did Viserys banish him for 10 years? It was bad. It was really bad. Viserys even said, you know, I ought to have you killed. But he wouldn't because he loves his brother. That's not loving somebody, is it? You know, people have tried to present it as, oh, you know, he loved it, you know, she matched his energy and then he was like really excited about it. Then why, when Viserys came to him, did he not say, it was Alicent who said, actually, I think it's probably more Daemon than Rhaenyra. She was the only one saying that. Why didn't Daemon just say, you know what, this is what happened, it wasn't as bad as you think. He could even have lied for her. He could have said, look, that's lies. She wasn't like that, I took her out, like maybe we saw some stuff, but you know, it's fine. He didn't. He was okay with her being ruined in her father's eyes, because A, he wants to be the most important one to Viserys, and 2, because he was selfish and he wanted her for himself. That's abusive. It is, like I don't know how else to describe it, like how can you even perceive that in a different way? It's in character for him. And you know, the actors have said, you know, we don't think that he's probably been physically violent to her before. Yeah, and I agree with that. I don't think so either, but I don't think he's ever had a situation where she's been more respected than him or he's been overlooked and he's not been in charge. And that's the change, isn't it? That's the interesting change. Okay, now to the big final climax of the episode. And I loved this episode, I really did. I really did love this episode. And I just think there's something so sad about the way, you know, Rhaenyra's lost one child this episode. And the pain of that she... I got so upset this episode because she's wrapping this child and it's the death of a daughter. She's not had a daughter before and that little girl is gone. She's grieving that and then she's going to lose Luke as well. You know, it's about motherhood, isn't it? I think this whole series has been leading there because the awful things that Rhaenyra and Alicent will do in the future will be about motherhood, I think. It will be because you're tied in. It will be because it is a situation where it's one will win, the other won't, you know. The team that lose will probably be put to death, and it will make them become more and more ruthless. And people saying, oh, I wish they'd started them out that way. But then there's nowhere to go, you know. I'm seeing people saying about Alicent, for example, who, again, in the book, it's being told by old men from the past who weren't even there, so of course it's going to be stereotyped in a sexist way. But even with that aside, you know, people have said, oh, she's not like my girl Cersei. You know, I love Cersei. I've got Cersei back here. Oh, you can't see her. I've got a really big Cersei figure. Maybe you can see her. I don't know, she's around there. But, you know, people saying, oh, you know, Cersei was, like, the best. But even Cersei, if we'd met her young... Now, of course, she's a completely different character to Alicent, which is another point, because Alicent is not evil. Cersei has got a real spite in her, and she always has had that nastiness in her from when she was younger, it seems. But even Cersei doesn't start out as bad as she becomes. If we met Cersei when she was younger, we'd probably feel a lot of sympathy for her. You know, it is when the children come into the equation, she starts to really let out that side of herself. And we see that she's abused by Robert. Like, we see that in the beginning of Game of Thrones. And that's a really villainous character. So it's ridiculous to me that people are expecting Alicent to, like, immediately be evil when even Cersei wouldn't have been. You know, they accuse this show of writing two-dimensional characters, but I think what they want is two-dimensional characters. They don't want nuanced characters. So Rhaenyra decides to send her boys off with their messages. So we've got Jace going to Cregan Stark, and we have Luke on his mission, which is supposed to be an easy mission, really close just to Storm's End. And oh, it's just awful because I'm a book reader, so I knew what was going to happen, and I saw the trailer. And it was even sadder than I thought. Now, so many people... Okay, the choice in this, so many people are getting at this. This is my perspective, feel free to disagree. So obviously we have a situation where Luke turns up with his terms. Aemon's already there with Vhagar. Vhagar looking absolutely terrifying. He goes in and gives his terms, and Boras Baratheon says, like, but what are you offering in return here? Because, like, the Greens are offering a marriage pact. And he does have a point here, because that's another thing, a flaw that Rhaenyra has, is that she kind of believes in a pure way in you made an oath and you're loyal. But because she is a Targaryen and she's been brought up like that, she's not understanding, like the Greens do, that actually you have to offer something. You know, they are offering one of their princes to that house, you know, so there's something in it for them. Rhaenyra simply sent a letter saying, you know, do you remember your oath? Anyway, you should do what I say because of the oath. And obviously that insults Boras Baratheon. So Luke's already been sent, like, it's a bad situation, and Rhaenyra's going to feel so bad about this, because Luke can't offer anything. He's already betrothed. You know, she's not offered anything, which is it's an oversight from her, and the Greens have done this so much better, because the Greens are offering terms. And actually, just to skip back, because I just realised there's that one scene I didn't get to about terms offering. Right, so the scene on the bridge, let's just go back to there for a second. Hold that thought on the next bit. We have actually got some decent terms from Otto, coming from Aegon, or presumably coming from Alicent, because I feel like if it was Otto's doing, he would have just killed everyone. We have got terms being offered for the Greens, from the Greens, which are quite decent. You know, it's saying, okay, we'll agree that Jacaerys is legitimate and he will be your heir, and Lucerys will be, you know, Lord of the Tides. That's pretty decent. And also the idea of offering, you know, the two younger sons, you know, you'll be like a cupbearer, etc., and a squire. People who aren't familiar with this kind of like fictional time period, the time period in British history, those would be positions of honour. You know, it's not like, oh, you want them to be a servant. You know, it is a position of honour, that's not an insult. And in that moment, you know, you've got Rhaenyra thinking about the terms, and everyone thinking she's weak for it. You know, you've got Daemon almost starting a war, trying to undermine her. You've got Otto with the book page, which just killed me off, because I knew I wasn't wrong. I knew this story was going to be about those girls. Like, I knew it was going to be about Alicent and Rhaenyra and that relationship. And the fact that Alicent kept that page. She kept it all those years. She's such a repressed lesbian. Like, it's not even... I feel like it's not even something that we're adding on now. Like, it's a thing. And I really hope that, like, you know, it continues to be a thing. It's you know, she's kept that. And it's her message to Rhaenyra that, you know, you're safe. And I know people are saying, oh, but how can they be friends if she's usurped Rhaenyra? Because it's more complicated than that, and there's a difference, even in this universe, between usurping someone's place and wanting them killed. This is a message to say, you're safe and your family is safe, which is going to make the betrayal later even worse, it's almost Rhaenyra having her trust broken, because she really gets that and she believes it. She thinks, right, Alicent isn't evil, she's not going to kill us, because that would be the concern. That's how Alicent is desperately trying to stop this becoming a war. Because if Rhaenyra thinks her children are at risk, she'll fight. If she can somehow get across that, look, I care about you, I wouldn't do that to you, there's no war. And people have been laughing at Rhaenyra because of that scene where she kind of runs up to Otto and takes his hand pin off and says, you know, you're a traitor, and throws it. And people have said, you know, it's really embarrassing. And it is embarrassing, but I think that's part of it, because Rhaenyra is a pure character. Rhaenyra actually thinks, wait, you've betrayed me, like you've committed this injustice, and how dare you, and that's the worst thing you can do. And you've kind of got the men around her who are kind of used to this kind of environment thinking like, all right. Like, but to her, you know, to break your honour, she's quite honourable. It's the worst thing. The worst ever thing. You know, also just kind of stands there. He's like, all right, okay. That's all right. And people just, I think people want her to be like Dany from later seasons already, but she's going to get there. She thought she was just going to inherit and everything was going to be fine. This is a horrible shock for her. You know, she's never had to face anything like this before. She has had quite a privileged life. Like, of course it's going to come across as kind of a bit childish and a bit sort of naive in some ways, because she is quite naive. Okay, I just had to put that in there because of the Alicent and Rhaenyra thing, and, you know, I love that element so much, I really do. Like, I couldn't be happier with that element. They've just made my whole life with that. But, okay, so the Storm's End situation. So you've got Luke turns up, Vhagar's already there. Vhagar is absolutely terrifying, looking like Godzilla or something. Like, I'm petrified. I'm petrified of Vhagar. And a lot of people have said, you know, good for him for carrying on, because I agree, if I turned up and Vhagar had been there, like, I would have just gone. No, sorry, not today, maybe another time. Like, they've moved, actually, Mum, like, they've actually just, there was no one there. The whole castle just disappeared, sorry. He gets there, and as a book reader we know, and obviously if you've seen Vhagar, Aemond is there. So Aemond's offering his terms, and he's chatting with one of the daughters, and it looks like a good chat, and he looks like a supermodel. Love how Aemond styled himself, like, he just looks so cool. He looks so cool all the time. I don't understand why people still like Daemon more as well, just visually speaking. Like, Aemond looks cooler. Like, am I wrong? I'm not talking about, like, looks and stuff, but, like, he's got a cooler vibe. He really has. So that whole situation happens. Boros Baratheon doesn't like the terms. He sends him on his way, but that's not enough for Aemond. So, like in the book, so this is where the sources in the book, they tell us that there was like an argument because Aemond says, you're not going until you've taken out your eye in payment for what you've done to me. I think Aemond is supposed to be 19, and I think Luke is supposed to be about 14. I know Aemond looks way older, and I think he's meant to in the book as well. I swear that actor looks so much older. But yeah, so they're both kind of teenagers. One's like a young teenager, one's like just becoming a man, really. And so he's asked him to take out his eye, which obviously Luke said no. He's promised his mum he's not going to do any fighting. And obviously, I'm not trying to say... I think the way people are interpreting this twist, I say twist, it's not really a twist, it's not against what happens in the book, is that they're saying, oh, it takes any agency away from Aemond and what he's done. But it doesn't, because Aemond is still being a nasty person. He's being a bully. He is, in front of Boros Baratheon and everyone there, he's doing a show of strength because he wants... I mean, the Greens are at a disadvantage, but they're trying to pretend they're not. It's like the ultimate spin, really, isn't it? They don't have as many dragons or anything, but they're trying to act like, you know, we've got every symbol of legitimacy. It's fine. So in front of Boros Baratheon, it's powerful for him to look like, I'm stronger, we're better, side with us if you want to win. If you want to survive, side with us. So it's like this public kind of show. And also he's got deep beef with Luke from earlier, obviously. And people have said, I can't remember really from the books, but apparently that's not actually that unusual. I think in the North, there's some sort of law, I might be wrong, where if that sort of thing happens, you are allowed to request the same thing back as payment. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not going to defend him, it's bad. It's a bad situation. So he's a bully, he shows his sapphire eye, which looks incredibly cool, and he chases him, and Boros says, no, not in my hall, there'll be no bloodshed here. He doesn't say, Luke, wait here with us, you'll be safe here. He just says, not under my roof. So... yeah, I mean, it's not taking away the badness of Aemond, and the way I perceive it is, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I see it more as like a... Do you know when you hear in the real world, you hear about horrible situations of like a hazing gone wrong or something? So you've genuinely got ill intent. You've got someone bullying someone else, it's a power thing. But it goes a little too far, and then it ends in a death. And it's not that the person who did it isn't responsible, because they're completely responsible. But it's different from actually wanting to murder someone. You know, it's that. So when Aemond is chasing Luke, I've got a lot of people saying, oh, he wanted to kill him. Like, I don't think he did. I think this is, again, a show of strength, because remember, the Greens only have 4 dragons. And I think that puts them at risk. And this is him showing, I think he intends that Luke's going to go back home and say, anyway, I ran for my life from Vhagar. Like, we don't want to mess with Vhagar. They've got the biggest dragon. In the book, I think Rhaenyra says that, you know, if they've got Vhagar, then, you know, we don't have much of an advantage. So he's showing that. He's intimidating him. And it's not a good thing to do, but it's a Jaime Lannister thing, because he's not there to kill him. He could have killed him if he wanted to, and he didn't. And I love that the show's given us this kind of level of threat. I was watching it with Dan, actually, and it's genuinely really scary. It's like Jaws or something, isn't it? Like, especially with the clouds and you don't know where. Vhagar is terrifying. Vhagar is like a dinosaur. Vhagar is like T-Rex. Like a T-Rex or something. Even more scary because I knew it was going to happen to Luke. It's just, it's a tragedy situation, but it is Aemond's fault. So a lot's been said, and people have been posting this a lot online, about Viserys' speech in, I think it was the first episode, where he says that the idea that people control dragons is an illusion. And again, it's like in the show, I think Dany says that dragons are not slaves. Like, there's many theories about this, about how dragons are actually more intelligent than humans. They have their own ideas, morality. I know they get bonded to their riders, but they're not completely within their control. So there's one theory that I've seen around a lot, which seems to be quite accepted by most people, that the dragons are part of the, like, Lord of Light prophecy, the prince that was promised kind of thing. And they want to help the prince that was promised. And as long as the Targaryens are passing down that information to each other and are ruling with the intent to stop the Long Night, they have the dragons with them. And that's also a reason why, after the Dance of Dragons, when that doesn't get passed down to anyone, and it just becomes about power and ego, and, like, being Targaryen and, like, succession, the dragons start dying off. Like, there's a theory that the Maester started killing the dragons off, but I don't believe that. Like, I do believe that it's probably to do with the magic, to do with the prophecy. The dragons are in on that. They're part of that. They know that's part of what they believe in their duty, if you can say that about a dragon. And that's why things go wrong after the Dance of the Dragons, because I'm assuming that message does not get passed to Aegon. I don't think Rhaenyra is going to be able to pass that to Aegon. And if I was writing it, I would actually have in her, sorry, spoiler alert, in her last moment, her saying, wait, before this happens, let me at least tell you something. And him just saying no and not believing her and not hearing it. So it's even more tragic. But yeah, the dragons are not slaves. And I certainly think that when it comes to, I mean, we've seen that with Vhagar. So obviously Vhagar has had 2 riders in the show. So he's had Laena and he's had Aemond. And the sense I'm getting is that, you know, the dragons choose their riders, it's not the other way around. And we'll see that later with the dragon seeds, because there are certain, you know, a lot of people will try and tame dragons or bond with dragons and they'll just get killed and it won't work. And someone brightened up the scene with young Aemond and Vhagar. And because I could actually see what was going on, Vhagar looks pleased. Like, Vhagar is excited. They've animated that dragon as if that dragon is excited to meet Aemond. And someone even said earlier in the episode, you see Aemond looking up to the sky and it's like he hears Vhagar. It's like Vhagar's calling to him. Because, you know, Vhagar is a dragon from the Conquest. I believe Visenya rode Vhagar. Vhagar did many war crimes. And again, people are saying that, oh, why should Aemond ride her? You know, I feel like Aemond is the sort of person that Vhagar would want to ride her. If Vhagar did not want that, they would not have bonded. So Vhagar's got her own beef. And who knows what the dragons are up to, but Vhagar's got her own personality. She has specifically gone for 2 riders, and think about her original rider, who can be ruthless and fearless and confident. Like, we see that in Laena, we see that in Aemond. And it makes sense why it wouldn't pass down to her daughters, because I don't think Vhagar would want a rider that it gets passed to. I think Vhagar would want somebody who wins that opportunity. Someone who's so fearless. I think that's almost a test. You know, it's like, if you think that you get me just on the basis of, you know, you knew my rider, think again. Like, you've got to earn this. Like, I'm the best dragon in the kingdom. So that whole idea that the riders don't control the dragons and it's the other way around, and the dragons are actually very much part of this, it's just so smartly done. Some people don't like it, but I think it's really smart. Because you've got Arax, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, But he's obviously a smaller, younger dragon, and they're obviously also bonded to their rider, especially, I think, the ones that are born in the cradle of their rider. You know, they feel more emotionally attuned. Like we see in this episode with Cyrax literally in pain because Rhaenyra in pain when she's going through birth. And, I mean, Caraxes is always doing dramatic things like Daemon. They're so attuned to each other. Like, they're so, like, keyed in. Obviously, it's like a reverse of what happened when they were kids, when Aemond lost his eye. Because you've got Luke, who accidentally... Arax lashes out against his will. So he, like, breathes fire, he tries to burn Vhagar, which is not good. And it seems like Vhagar herself, the actual dragon, is mad about that and wants to show Arax that you're not doing that to me. Because that's when Aemond loses control. Both the riders lose control. It seems to be about Vhagar making a point. You've got poor Aegon up there thinking, wait, you're actually an incredibly dangerous animal. You did not do what I said. Wait a minute. But you could say that it's actually Arax or Arax who starts that whole situation because he burns Vhagar. And then Vhagar retaliates. And the riders kind of don't have any control. The riders don't have any control over what happens after that. I actually think that's a fantastic take on this scene, and I just think it's the best one they could possibly have done, because you've got that idea, haven't you, that the dragons are like nukes. This is a world that, like, these are the two second sons that were the most vulnerable, the most caring, you know, and it's come to this. And again, I feel like people are so, like, in their teams, and they're so determined to be anti-green all the time, that they've just decided that, oh, it's against the book. Oh no, they've done it wrong, that Vhagar, like, you know, attacks and ate Luke and Arax, like. But there's, in the book, right, I've got the book here, I'm going to try and find the passage, but remember that this is fourth-hand sources, okay? And especially this moment, think about it, the fact that there's only two human people, who knew what happened up there, and one of them got eaten. Right. Now, what do you think? So imagine that situation, like, even if it had gone horribly wrong, like the show shows us. What would that make Aemond look like if he came down and he was like, yeah, so I lost control of my dragon and I accidentally did something really bad? It's going to make them look weak. He's not going to want to tell people that. I think the Greens are good at propaganda, they're good at spin. I think they might try and twist it around to make it some sort of show of strength. I think maybe Aegon might have something to do with that, because in the book, obviously, when Alicent and Otto find out what's happened, they just freak out because they know that that's it. Like, now Rhaenyra's lost one of her sons, none of them are safe. And obviously we know what happens later in the story because of that, which is going to be even more tragic because of what they've done with Aegon and Helena and the kids, and the fact that it's an accident just makes it even worse. But let me just read you the passage from the book. So this is all we've got. This is fourth-hand accounts. Nobody was actually there, and it even presents us with different situations. The show has not just, it hasn't gone against the book at all. In the slightest, people saying that just obviously haven't read the book. Listen. Outside, the storm was raging. Thunder rolled across the castle. The rain fell in blinding sheets, and from time to time great bolts of blue-white lightning lit the world as bright as day. It was bad weather for flying, even for a dragon, and Arax was struggling to stay aloft when Prince Aemond mounted Vhagar and went after him. Had the sky been calm, Prince Lucerys might have been able to outfly his pursuer, for Arax was younger and swifter. But the day was as black as Aemond's heart, says Mushroom. And that's even in quotation marks, so that's just a biased account from Mushroom. And so it came to pass that the dragons met above Shipbreaker Bay. Watchers on the castle walls saw distant blasts of flame and heard a shriek cut the thunder. I mean, again, so distant watchers on the castle walls. They don't know what's going on. Then the two beasts were locked together, lightning crackling around them. Vhagar was 5 times the size of her foe, the hardened survivor of 100 battles. If there was a fight, it could not have lasted long. Like, if there was a fight, it could not have lasted long. These people didn't watch a dragon fight. That's not what's happened here. We already know there's a bias against, you know, Aemond having a black heart. So it seems like people are taking the worst possible interpretation. Arax fell broken to be swallowed by the storm-lashed waters of the bay. His head and neck washed up beneath the cliffs below Storm's End 3 days later to make a feast for crabs and seagulls. Mushroom claims that Prince Lucerys' corpse washed up as well, and tells us that Prince Aemond cut out his eyes and presented them to Lady Maris on a bed of seaweed, but this seems excessive. Some say Vhagar snatched Lucerys off his dragon's back and swallowed him whole. It has even been claimed that the prince survived the fall, swam to safety, but lost all memory of who he was, spending the rest of his days as a simple-minded fisherman. The true telling gives all these tales the respect they deserve, which is to say, none. Lucerys Velaryon died with his dragon, Monkin insists. This is undoubtedly correct. The prince was 13 years of age. His body was never found, and with his death, the war of ravens and envoys and marriage pacts came to an end, and the war of fire and blood began in earnest. So I don't know what people are talking about when they say it's anti the book, because quite literally, the book says all we know, literally all we know, is that the dragons were in the air, people saw lightning, and there were the dragons and there was some fire, and someone shouted something, and Lucerys Velaryon died with his dragon. That's all we know. That's all we know. So it just frustrates me. It frustrates me. I mean, again, we're back to that point at the very start when people are saying, oh, they're trying to make Aemond too likeable and he's a bad person. Like, they're not, though. You know, it's not all... He still chases a 14-year-old boy to scare him on a massive dragon, cackling. You know, they're not making him some, you know, sweet character. You know, I genuinely think these are the sorts of people that, if Game of Thrones was told differently in this manner, would actually get angry at the fact that Jaime Lannister was actually trying to kill the Mad King because he was going to hurt a load of people. I don't think these people want nuance. I think it's a really smart addition, and it adds to the whole theme that the show's been going with all along, which is that the dragons are all that make the Targaryens powerful. That's it. The Targaryens have this supremacy myth, but it's just that they have dragons and other people don't. You know, and as we see going on in the story with the dragon seeds, we figure out that you don't even have to be a Targaryen to ride a dragon. It's all a myth. It's a supremacy myth. It's a conquest myth. That's the story. Like, that's the point. And I think it's a really smart move to have that. And also to have the dragons be not just pawns in this, you know. it's genuinely interesting. Like, what are the other dragons going to do when they find out about what happened to Arax? Like, they're going to have skin in this game as well. Like, it's just really interesting that the Dance of Dragons is so... I don't know. Viserys said that the dragons are a power that men should never have messed with. And by the end of the story, like, the dragons are going to kill so many people, and so many dragons are going to die. And for what? You know, I think that's kind of the point. So, you know, a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, the show's got this anti-dragon agenda, anti-Targaryen. Are you kidding me? The book itself has an anti-dragon, anti-Targaryen agenda. Not as in the people in the system, but the idea that there's this supremacist race of people that should rule because they have terrifying nuke dragons. Like... The dragons are only, you know, they only work if they're, you know, trying to bring that prophecy. You know, in order to save people in the future. That's the only way it makes sense. But even then, if you look back in history, you know, people are saying things like, oh, I hate Vhagar now for doing this awful thing. Vhagar, no, that old dragon, bless her heart, she's taken part in many war crimes. She burned Dawn. I don't know. People idealise the Targaryens so much. Like, they want this... It's really worrying because they're like this, you know, blonde-haired, like, purple-eyed, like, beautiful race. And it's like, they're supreme because of their blood. And it's... I worry about that. I worry about how people get really invested in that. But anyway, tell me what you thought about this. Yeah. If I've forgotten anything, I might add it in the description. Yeah, let me know what you thought. Also, so I make music, so I wrote a song, well, I did a cover recently. I've been writing a lot of music because of House of the Dragon. And you know I'm sapphic and I'm really into the Rhaenyra and Alicent thing, and I did a cover of Fleetwood Mac's Rhiannon, but with Rhaenyra's name in it. That's on my music channel, so I'll put that on the screen now if they let me do that. I'll also put that in the description box, so... love you loads, and I'll see you really soon, and I'll probably review... I'm going to go back to the start and then review episode 1 next week, I think. Okay. Love you loads, I'll see you really soon. I can't believe we have to wait 2 years. I don't know how am I going to wait 2 years? How am I going to wait 2 years? I don't know. Also, let me know who are your favourites. Like, who are your favourites at the end of this? Because for me, it's Alicent, Rhaenyra, Aemond. I want to say Corlys, maybe? I don't know, like, Helena. Who else? I want to say as well, I want to say Rhaena and Baela, but, you know, I can't wait for their stories to kick in because at the moment it feels like they don't have enough to do. But once their stories kick in, I can't wait. Like Daemon's daughters. Rhaenys' granddaughters, like, come on. Alright. I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Alright, bye!